Hello, and welcome back to Sharing a Chapter a Day. This is Do, Ra, me, and today I will be reading Chapter 127 of Engagement in Peril by Dara, Odoe, Sok. Chapter 127 is titled Unsuitable Foster Home. After 6 months of being cared for by the state-funded orphanage and under the watchful eyes of Detective Hampton, Shinchin was happily adopted by a nice local family who had already adopted 3 other children from there. The family was also being helped with state funding for adopting and watching over these orphans. Detective Hampton, Detective Hampton saw nothing out of the ordinary while running the Hortons' background, and they seemed a good enough family with a good home, and he thought they would be a good fit for the Shinshin. With words of encouragement and promises of follow-ups and visit at their new home, Shinshin agreed to go with the Horton. Several with several items of his worldly possession, and the small packet that he got from the good detective of his late parents, Shinchin went home with his new guardian several days down the road. The Horton was a good family for the most part. They made sure all their children were fed and well nourished. They also made sure that their kids had clothes on their backs and that they attended the local public school on a daily basis. What the detective didn't know then was that the Horton also had a dark side to them. Both parents were avid gamblers and addicted as such. They often used the thousands of dollars that they had received from the state Social Security insurance for the care of their adopted children and wasted at the local casinos, whatnot. After about 7 months or so with the Hortons, Shinchin began to see what they were up to. Sometimes kids were yelled at and smacked around out of anger and frustration, often then while he saw it all, while Shinshin witnessed it all. Once all the kids were snugly tucked in bed and off into dreamland, their legal guardians would leave the house and go off to spend their monthly dispensed SSI Social Security checks on themselves. At the casinos, of course. Fortunately for Shinchin, he hadn't been spanked or beaten yet by the Horton. Shinchin liked it somewhat there at his new home, and he now has a family. He adored his siblings and his parents too, but he was afraid for them as well. He had to confide his experiences there with someone, and the only person he really trusted then was Detective Hampton. So during one of his usual visits, Shinshin told the good detective of what he had seen with the Horton and what they did with him and his adopted siblings. The detective made sure Shinshin understood what he was saying about his legal guardian abuse and neglect and wanted to make sure what the child's claim is good for the taking. So he planned out his next move accordingly. Detective Hampton began to stake out the Hortons' home to see what they were up to at night, to see if Shinshin's claim was true. One weekend after the state's SSI check were mailed out, usually at the beginning of each month, the detective waited in an unmarked vehicle to see what the Hortons will be doing that evening. After several hours of sitting and waiting patiently in his car, he didn't have any fuss about his ordeal. He was used to this sort of things before, when he worked undercover and stakeout, whatnot during his heydays in the force. The Horton kids were usually put to bed around 9, and like Shinshin had stated, around 10 that evening the Horton came out of their home, dressed fashionably, like what they were going out to a fancy restaurant or something. They left their home, boarded their newer model vehicle, and headed out of town. Unnoticed by the caring foster parent, Detective Hampton followed them in his unmarked police vehicle. The Horton left San Pedro and headed toward LAX airport area. They drove on Gaffey Street southbound, taking the I-110 ramp north, then hook a quick left on the Harbor Freeway toward Los Angeles. After about an 8-mile stretch, they then merged onto the I-405 north before exiting Century Boulevard and headed northbound toward the Hollywood Park Casino. After about an hour or so on the freeway with Detective Hampton following several cars behind them, the Horton drove on into the city of Inglewood and pulled up to the valet parking area at the Hollywood Park Casino. They were greeted by a valet attendant and given a ticket, and Mr. Horton tipped the valet boy while his wife was adjusting her elegant long-necked dress. Afterward, the nicely dressed couple walked into the casino with their vehicle, drove off to the park in the VIP area. Detective Hampton pulled up to the valet area and informed the waiting valet person that he was a cop and asked that he can park close by. With his finger pointing in the direction only a few feet away from the casino entrance, the valet attendant directed the good cop Hampton pulled up alongside the red painted curb, exited his vehicle, and proceeded into the Hollywood Park Casino as well. Once inside the large gambling hall, Hampton went about to look for the Horton. With his many years of experience as a cop and detective, he put one he put one and one together. He figured since they were delicately dressed and was sure that they were high rollers of sorts. He knew that the Hollywood Park Casino also hosted and catered to fancy parties and dining experiences. But tonight, on a weekday night, there wasn't any sort of thing going on then. He figured out as much, and that the Horton were high end gamblers. He asked one of the casino floormen where the high stakes room was, and he was directed toward the upper level of the casino. Slowly walking and observing gamblers all about the casino, Detective Hampton made sure not to be seen by someone that would recognize him, let alone the Hortons. At the high stake room, he was stopped and questioned by security before allowing him to enter the smoke-filled room after showing his credential whatnot. In the high stake room, there were numerous card games from Super Pan 9, high stake blackjack, Chinese Pagao poker, Texas Hold'em poker, high-low stud, Caribbean poker, Mexican poker, three-card brags, 31, and high-low draws. Detective Hampton walked about the smoky room looking at faces of gamblers and patrons, some busy their face with food and beverages at their assigned seats on each table. Most paid no attention to their cards game or game at hand, and some were lost in stupid and ridiculous conversations. Of course, there were those who seemed pissed in the face from their sudden loss and disappointments. Some were happy-go-lucky with joy of winning and such. There was a room of sin. This was a room of sin, greedy sins at most. After a good walkabout around the room, Detective Hampton saw the Horton. They were situated at a high-stake blackjack table, sitting across from one another at the same table. Mrs. Horton was seated at seat number 6, while her husband was seated at the seat number 2. As Detective Hampton looked on, he saw that the couple had a system of cheating the dealer and the casino. The good detective kept his distance, making sure that his presence went unnoticed by the Horton. He watched on while they played and signaled their hands to each other with repetition of winks and touches to the face and table. Detective Hampton was sure that these two had been doing this sort of things for years. They were good, and winning they seemed to be at the table. He also noticed that they had ordered specific food and dishes, part of this strategy to beat the system, and he was sure that the dealer perhaps was in on the cheating game too. While viewing and observing the Horton, Detective Hampton jotted some notes in his small notebook, being patient of his action and meticulously taking good notes for the future references. After several hours and after several card dealers would switch onto the particular table, the Horton finished and cashed out their winnings. Around 4 that the following morning, the Horton gathered their belongings and left the casino, while Detective Hampton paced behind them. Once outside, the Horton waited for the valet to bring his car around. They gave a good-sized tip to the man that was outside with them then. Turned out he was one of the dealers that dealt to them that night while the good detective watched on. Several hundred feet afar from the Horton, he viewed the getting into the vehicle and leaving the casino. And with his notes in hand, the good detective left the casino that morning and went back to his apartment in San Pedro. Before turning for bed, he looked over some of his notes and made some changes in adjustment, took off his holster gun, and went to sleep for the morning, knowing that he has to get up really early the next day to begin his morning shift of police work at his local precinct. With what he had gathered from Shinchan and what he had found from the following the Horton that previous night during their outing at the casino, Detective Hampton talked it over with his captain and asked for permission to further investigate the Horton. Charges of fraud, neglect, and abuse of the children could be brought up against the Horton. His captain agreed and allowed his request to look deeper into the Horton's gambling necessity and abuse. Knowing and fearful for the sake of Shinchin and the other adopted children at the Horton's home, he pushed for a court order to search the premises. After several more weeks of careful, meticulous investigating and evidence gathering on the Horton, and with the state's child protective custody team assigned to his group, Detective Hampton served a search warrant at the Horton's home, and the adopted children were taken out of the home and watched over by Social Services, with Detective Hampton and several other police officers went about to ransack the Horton's home for evidence. While the Horton were in police custody and taken back to the police station for questioning, the Detective Hampton and his team went about ransacking his home for the further evidence of fraud and neglect. After several hours of boxing and enveloping cash, papers, documents, and other evidence, The Horton were read their Miranda rights and booked for fraud, neglect, and abuse of their several adopted children. In shocks and mournful tears, trying to defend their evil, sinful habit, the couple said that they did nothing wrong. They were good to the kids, loved them all, and that they just had a bad case of gambling problems. The cops and the court didn't see it as such and ignored their plea and cries for forgiveness. While their trial proceeded in the Superior Courthouse, all the adopted kids were returned to the orphanage, and once again Shinshin and the other kids were under the care of the state-funded establishment for care of orphan and children. The Horton were found guilty of all charges and sentenced 5 to 10 years at different state penitentiaries. Feeling somewhat relieved from all that had happened, Shinshin was somewhat satisfied. He was still with his sibling then that he had come to call brothers and sister, and he was once again with those friends he had come to know all those months back at the orphanage. Only about 3/4 of the year did Shinshin stay with his first foster family. Once again, on a regular basis, Detective Hampton visited his favorite orphan at the children's ranch, making sure to bring a smile or two for Shinshin and still trying his best to beat a gifted child at the intellectual game of chess. Thank you for listening. This is the end of Chapter 127. Be on the lookout for Chapter 128, titled Shinshin Loses Detective Hampton. This is Do, Ra, me, and I'll see you later. Thank you.